Okay, so it's preparing to live stream now.
Okay.
Okay. Hi, and welcome to the Liberty Bells. I'm Suzanne Hamner.
And I'm Lynn Taylor, and welcome to this edition of the Liberty Bell Saturday Night Special. Our special guest this evening is Jennifer McWilliams from the state of Indiana. She is a former teacher. She's now a consultant for the topic of social and emotional learning, where she travels the country to inform parents about the dangers and harms that this mind manipulation has caused. So, welcome, Jennifer.
Thank you, ladies, for having me.
Oh, we're really glad to have you. If there is one thing I think that we all kind of puke on is that social and emotional learning is where we need the barf bags, the barf barrels. It is one of those things that I think just doesn't belong in education.
Well, absolutely. It doesn't belong in government in any
Either.
stretch of the imagination. And as you know, Suzanne and Jennifer, I don't know if you've seen our former shows, but we researched a document that supposedly was written in the United Kingdom. It's called Mindspace. And when we got to looking into it, we took a month-long series of shows to go into it. What we found was that 95% of the research came from America through either businesses or higher education institutes. And this whole setup is not for the schools to indoctrinate through mind manipulation, but entire government systems.
Oh, yes. And we also looked at the companion document, the Australian document, which was basically the playbook for it all. It was a how to guide to do all of that. And so, between those two documents, it was just a big, big, explosive uh, output of what I want to call manipulation.
Well, yeah, well, you can trace that to Edward Bernays. And
That's right.
Jennifer, I'm sure you've probably looked at his propaganda initiative that was here in America as well.
I'm sorry, it cut out for a minute. I didn't hear what you
Oh,
said.
oh, okay.
It was,
Okay, sorry about that. I was just going to say, I'm sure that you've looked at Edward Bernays's propaganda work, because he did an entire section on how this propaganda or mind manipulation would work well in education. And that is really key to the history of the social and emotional learning here in America.
yeah, yeah. Social emotional learning it's a thought reform program that
Mhm.
our government is using for our children to shift the mindset of them to believe in a very progressive, radical ideology. And my research with social emotional learning goes back to where it started with the Fetzer Institute. I don't know if you ladies have talked about that place before, but with John Fetzer. And in their theory of change, they literally talk about that the mission of their institute is to create a new spiritual global consciousness for
Mhm.
the children, and that they needed to find an an innocuous pathway into the education system to infect our children with this. And that's what they have done. And that is where Castle was founded, and that is where social emotional learning was coined.
Very good. Very good. All right. Speaking of that, and now what we're going to be able to do with the archive version of this comes out, Jennifer, as our audience well knows, we will have lots and lots of links. So we'll make sure that we have any of the documents or any of the things that we
Yes.
talk about tonight, we will have as far as in the archive for those
Sure.
people so that they can go back and look on their own. Because I know you've probably, in all your speaking with parents, you've probably met those who like, hey, I want to see it for myself. Don't
Yeah.
just tell me what to think. Just let me see for myself what is going on so that I can, help my family.
And
Um,
Absolutely.
I liked what you called it, infecting our children. I
yeah,
liked that term, infection, because that says it all. That
that's
says it all.
right. Okay. Well, I just wanted to give a little brief timeline. And we can certainly go through this if we want to. And if we want to make sure that we have all those archive resources, we absolutely will. But what I've been able to find, I have an International Arab Journal of English for Specific Purposes. This was written back in 2018. And this is a paper that was written by Master of Education, Dr. Jody Beatty, as well as Robert Morris. And what they were calling the paper is the history of social and emotional learning. And it was really interesting that through their particular research, they were tying it all the way back to Plato in 308 BC under
Wow.
the Republic. Now, here's what's interesting. Utopia, which is George Lucas's Common Core machine aligned garbage for mind manipulation, cites the same source. They will tie it also to Comer's school development program that was piloted in the 60s. Now, we need to also understand that according to all these cited resources, they're going down the timeline, and guess which one they're leaving out?
Which
The
one?
1970s document that I took and one through that Charlotte Iserby mailed me personally. And that was that master blueprint for not only healthy children in body, but healthy children in mind. And a lot of these roots were in that. And if we'll remember, that particular document was the master game plan for the rest of the nation, that the federal government said, okay, we're going to come in, we're going to incentivize this task force team through the state of North Carolina for this blueprint. And Jennifer, what you're saying about this innocuous coming in and totally manipulating the children, it's through this particular plan that you can see how the school was set up as that hub to do just that. But it gets even better, okay? That was in the 70s. Then between 87 and 92, we have Weisenberg and Shiver and others with K through 12, New Haven Social Development Program at the public school system there in New Haven, Connecticut. You have the WT Grant Consortium, the school-based promotion of social competency, which also laid out a social and emotional game plan for schools. Then, of course, in 94, as Jennifer just said, the Fetzer Institute, which materialized into what we now know as CASEL, which is the Consortium for Academic, Social, and Emotional Learning. And it was 3 years later that Bill Gates came through his organization, or excuse me, not his organization, but through his funding of the ACSD, that united with CASEL to pump in so much money for it. So anyone who thinks Bill Gates is the one where it started, this is where they're incorrect. He came in late in the game. But now remember, as far as the timeline, that was 97. Illinois was the first state in 2004 that was pumping out this kind of stuff. And here's what's interesting. 3 years later, in 2004, what did Gates do? He signed that agreement with UNESCO for what? One World Curriculum for One World Schools that would tie in all this social and emotional learning. And then we have the Sustainable Development Goals that run right into it through Sustainable Development Goals number 3, number 4, number 8, and plenty more.
Now, if I'm not mistaken, did he funnel that also? Did he funnel that through the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation? Because if I'm not mistaken, we're talking about the 90s.
Yeah,
Wasn't
that
that
was
about the time when
Jennifer.
he did
Was that
that?
correct? Was it through his foundation or
Was it
was
through
it through
that?
another entity?
I believe it was through his foundation.
Yeah,
Yes.
that's what I'm thinking. It was, yeah, it was through his
Yeah.
And the
foundation.
reason why I'm saying that is because that was about the time that he had to go through that image change. You know, he had a really bad image there, and it was in the 90s when he had to kind of
Mhm.
reinvent himself. And they came up with this Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation that they have funneled everything
Right,
since through that.
right. They absolutely have. They
Yeah.
absolutely have. So
This
Jennifer, with your program, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. Go ahead.
no, that's okay. That's great. Yeah, I mean, I totally agree with what you're saying. But I just want to, just in case anyone's confused on what I was saying, the
Yes.
actual castle and actual term of social emotional learning was coined at the Fetzer Institute. But
Yeah.
you're absolutely right. It goes all the way back through all of these people. I read the first book that they put out. I think it was in 1997 that the founders of CASEL put out, promoting social and emotional learning. And they say in there that they are that they reference John Dewey and
of course,
all of those things. So this has been in the works for a long time, and
Absolutely.
they came together and stated their whole thing at their meeting where they founded all of this was that this was going to be the missing piece in education, and that's where they really started to usher it in under this mental health whole child. And the whole child, I tell people when they talk about whole child, they are literally talking about mind, body, spirit. That is what they mean.
Absolutely.
Right.
And here's the thing, you've been in education, so when you were in your classroom, as I've seen in other classrooms, you didn't educate just part of the child. You had the whole child there. So this whole misnomer over, oh, well, we've not been addressing the whole child needs is bunk, because yes, you have.
I just put out something because in fact, just this last week I was in Florida and I spoke at a meeting for people coming to learn about what was going on. And at the end of it, there was two school board members that had showed up, and I think they just showed up literally to counter me. And I wonder, which is fine. I can have a debate, I can have a conversation, but they were saying, well, this is social emotional learning is just stuff that teachers have always done. And, and so, there's parts of it that with good meaning, you, of course, if you have a child that's misbehaving, you might have to do a little role playing type things with them to kind of get them to understand. But I told them, I said, look, if you are someone that thinks that social emotional learning is good, whatever the reason may be, you may say social emotional learning is good because it helps my child with ADHD. It helps my child with academic needs that they have. It helps my child who has experienced real trauma. And I always say to them, I say, but our schools were doing those things anyways. Our schools were already doing those things. The difference is with SEL, it brings in all of this radical thought reform.
It does.
Now, let me just say one thing about ADHD. That is a bunk diagnosis. That there's the guy that invented he invented it. Let's just put it. He invented it, coined it, and he recanted it on his deathbed. So this is not. It's not even. But how many kids have been medicated because of it, and how many doctors? We're talking about medical doctors. We're talking about psychiatrists, psychologists. Still are pushing this ADHD. Hey, here's some Ritalin,
Yeah, but here's the thing. Here's the thing. It's not just for children, and that's what this whole social and emotional learning is. It's because it's not just through K through 12 public education. It's in our communities. It's in our culture. It is in our higher education system. It's in our workforce. It's in our doctor's office. It's in our church. It is absolutely everywhere. And, Jennifer is right. It is to shift the attitudes, values, and beliefs away from what is supposed to be American values into this collective, very dangerous territory.
It's kind of like the Borg hive mind. It's what I call it. It's kind of like a Borg hive mind. Somebody's telling you what to think, So
it is. It's exactly what they're doing. Yes.
Yeah.
It is. Now it's showing. I know it's showing up in the CRT, but where else is it showing up, Jennifer?
The social emotional learning.
Yeah. Where is it? I know. Yeah.
So it is supposed to be integrated into every single part of a child's day, whether it be academics, anything within the school, the culture, everything. And that's literally right out of the reports from CASEL. It says if you have, because they want it to be called, systemic SEL, systemic social emotional learning. So it has to affect everything within the school system. And when they brought in SEL, they did a couple things that really changed the way the schools worked immediately. One thing that they did was they went away from traditional teaching methods, which we had Common Core, so it was already a mess. And then they said, well, your kids aren't learning correctly because traditional teaching methods those are racist. Those are oppressive. So what we need to
Right.
use is what's called it's a new teaching method called culturally responsive teaching. And I talked to this about people because when they made that shift in teaching methods,
Mhm.
they really opened the door for teachers that really want to push this. And the universities are producing tons of them now.
Mhm.
Yep.
It opens the door for them to push this on children. Culturally responsive teaching is coined by Gloria Ladson-Billings, who is a outspoken critical race theorist.
Mhm.
She talks about that when you are a teacher, your job is not to just teach academics, but you are to teach them to have a socio-political critical conscience that will critique the inequitable systems that we have in our country and in our school. So it's really dangerous what they're doing. But
Oh, yeah,
it
and I wonder who in the world decided that it was okay to do that to other people's
But wait a
children.
minute, wait a minute. That
Mhm.
is an updated version of what Edward Bernays said
Yes,
in
it
his
is.
propaganda piece about education and the
Yes.
purposes of schools.
But still, we're talking about somebody else
Mm-hmm.
that is infringing, and
Right.
I call it infringing because as a parent, if you are responsible for your child's education, Bible tells us so, you are to educate your children. So when somebody else comes in and they're putting in all of this here, where do they get that authority? They don't have it. So at this point, who is deciding that, hey, I have the authority to do this? That's what we're going to do. It's a usurpation. And how are parents not seeing this and saying no?
well, because I think I can answer that a little bit, and people are
Okay.
obviously waking up a lot right now. But when they changed the teaching method, it
Hmm.
didn't change the lessons that came home and that the parents saw.
Okay.
Okay. So a
Okay.
lot of people think social emotional learning is a curriculum. It is not a curriculum. And so we have parents across this country that go and want to see the curriculum. They want to see it, and that's great. But unless you're in California where they're literally teaching critical race theory and all of this stuff, a
Mm-hmm.
lot of the curriculum in the schools it's going to be the Common Core version, of course, but it's going to seem very innocent still.
Right.
But when you change the way that you teach those lessons, that's what the parents can't see. That's what doesn't come home.
Mm-hmm.
So you still get a math lesson that comes home with just the regular answers, however they solve them with their Common Core nonsense. And but you don't see the lesson, and you don't see this shift in teaching children. I can give you an example. I'll just give you a very simple example. So if you are a culturally responsive teacher,
Mm-hmm.
you are supposed to engage students in discussions throughout the lessons and around race and oppression and
Mm-hmm.
identity. So we'll use a very simple when let's say, well, second grade, you have a story problem, a math story problem that says, Johnny is going to drive 50 miles to the theme park with his family, and they're already 20 miles along. How much longer do they have to drive to get to the theme park, right? Very simple. We all know to solve these problems. But if you're a culturally responsive teacher, you can take the answers, maybe not. Now math is racist as well, but you are supposed to engage them into this lesson and use it as a political tool. So you would say, now children, do all children have a family, a mom and a dad? Is that a family for all children? And then you'll have children raise their hand, right? And
Mm-hmm.
no, I have this type of family, or I know a family like this that has two moms or two dads. And then you would say, do all families have a car? Why do you think all families don't have a car? I don't have a car. Why don't families have a car? This is culturally responsive
Right.
teaching, right? And so
Yep.
just for anybody that's not familiar with that, I want to kind of give an example of what that means. And so you engage these children into a political conversation that is purposeful, and you really are exploiting the emotions and the natural empathy of children
Mm-hmm.
to
Yep.
push this political ideology on them. And
Right.
but when the lesson comes home, right, then the parents are just seeing the lesson that says 30 miles to go to the music park.
Now,
So it takes, they
yeah.
aren't seeing what's happening with the way that it's being presented.
Yeah.
in the classroom. Now, this goes on in the classroom. All right. I don't know how familiar you are, but I did on Hammer It Out. I did several episodes on the parental rights amendments, and we did a show
Mm-hmm.
uh, with Publius Hulda, Joanna Martin. She's an attorney about these parental rights amendments, where they're saying, "Well, we're giving you all of these rights. Well, you already had them, but the only thing it gave in the school was the right to review the material. So you
Whether
don't
it
get to
was
see.
comprehensive sexuality, whether it was CRT, whether it
It
was the
didn't matter.
SEL,
Yep,
you didn't get a seat at the
that's
table,
right.
Jennifer. You just got to
Got to
look at
look
it.
at the material. You didn't
And
get a
it
seat at the
also,
table. You didn't get to say no. I don't want this.
Yeah.
You had no. All you got to do was see it. And then in some states there was a time frame. You only got like 2 weeks, I think, at the start of a semester or a quarter to even look at this. So these are what I would say they are backdoor slamming parents into the face. They're slamming the door in the parents' face, saying, "Well, all you can do is look. You don't get to say your children are going to go through this. You just get to see it." But if some of this is not being seen and it's in the classroom, like what you are saying, parents don't even know this is going on, and then they're championing these parental rights amendments, was doing nothing but taking their rights away.
yeah, yes.
Okay.
And I agree. And I want parents to
Mm-hmm.
understand this is why it's so important for people to understand that social emotional learning is not a curriculum. And so most of those
Right.
parental right bills
Mhm.
gave you the right to view the curriculum. If
Right.
you go to your school and you understand that social emotional learning, say you have a lot of schools use a program, some don't, some just use the competencies through the education department, but
Right.
a lot of them use programs. And if you go and you ask to look at the program, that everything that came with it, everything that they're using, all of the materials with the social emotional learning program, you will get denied. And the reason they deny you is because it is a third party proprietary private company that they have purchased this from.
Mm-hmm.
And because of those laws, parents aren't allowed to see it. So they with the parental rights, they made parents think, okay, we're good, we can at least see everything. No,
Right.
you cannot.
Mhm.
Right.
And
No.
they are not going to share that SEL program with you. They'll
Right.
give you some examples, but
Mm-hmm.
they will not share it with you, and you will
More or
get
less,
denied.
too, they're not going to share
Right.
probably critical race theory with you. They're not going to share the sexual grooming uh, programs, because, I mean, everybody's championing for Florida, but Florida didn't stop anything. They just said, yeah, no from K through third grade, but fourth grade, yep, on we go. What a magic number, fourth grade.
Right. Well, one of the things that I found out, oh goodness, it was probably back a couple of years or so when everybody was talking about, well, I just need to opt Johnny and Susie out of all these high stake assessments. And, it goes back to the same thing about the parents and the war that has been waged on the parents being able to stand up for their children. And what I would have moms and dads call me from all over the nation going, what in the heck am I supposed to do? Because I've opted out so many years that now there's this huge data chunk that's missing from their record. And now Johnny and Susie can't graduate. And I said, well, okay, when you went to opt out, what was the response that you got? When you said, hey, I don't want to do these computer adaptive data mining pigeonholing tests. Well, we got told that either there was no alternative, like paper and pencil, or the fact of it was so interwoven that to pull anything that was connected out, Jennifer, they couldn't do it because then there would be nothing for them to teach. And I
Wow. Okay.
think that's happening with the SEL and the other stuff. I really do.
That's interesting. So at the SEL specific surveys, I still
Mm-hmm.
we have to use what we can do in
Right.
every step of the way. So I still believe every parent everywhere should opt out of any data that you can
Right.
get them out.
Absolutely.
Um,
Yes.
and because they use the specific social emotional learning surveys, what they will call climate surveys or
Right. School
diversity.
safety.
Yeah,
Yeah.
school safety. Yeah, all those climate climate surveys and diversity inclusion surveys. There is no reason to allow them to data mine with those specific things, those areas.
Right.
Now, as far as academics go, I'm kind of, it is integrated, but I'm surprised that they said they couldn't possibly graduate. But I would get them out of that data because they're using that data and it's manipulated data. They interpret the data to get the results that they want. And the results always show that the system is racist and oppressive. Always. They interpret it through an equity lens. So when they do that, then it comes back to the school, and the school then must make some changes to try to make up for those areas of oppression that the data shows. And so when that happens, it just drives the social emotional learning even more. It drives more counselors in the school. It drives more interventions and more like gender clubs. It drives more culture shift in the school. And then they let that go on for a while, and they said, oh, we better survey these kids again and see how it's going now. And so they survey the kids again, and then they interpret it through the lens, and then they again come back with some form of oppression, and the cycle continues until they get where they want. Yeah.
It's that hamster wheel that we've talked about. It absolutely is. Well, I didn't know if you had been able to see the Biden-Harris administration's new announcement about their 2 new actions for youth mental health crisis, because after all, COVID has just totally screwed all our brains up. But
I think Biden and Harris have a mental health crisis.
I do too. That day I said, who wants them to address the mental health of children?
Thank you. Exactly. Well, you've got 2 mentally unhealthy individuals going to address mental health for kids. Yeah,
here was what was so interesting in a diabolical way was that the Department of Education was gleeful over the trillions of dollars that are going to be thrown at this, because it's going to be a comprehensive national strategy that will overhaul everything we've ever perceived and known about mental health, which backs up right into what? Social and emotional learning.
Yeah.
And the really twisted part of this is that it dovetails right into one of the recent UN reports about all the inequalities and all the problems with the mental health across the globe, and how many missed opportunities that there are. And guess what? Schools are the choice vehicle. So what better way to trot out this? Now I'm going to run down the list real quick. Okay. $300 million to expand mental health in our schools, Jennifer, especially through the bipartisan Safer Communities Act, which I've done a show or 2 on. $140 million for a pipeline for mental health services. Anytime the government uses a pipeline for people, it's awful. Another $140 million for school-based mental health services, not just for Johnny and Susie, but for everybody in Johnny and Susie's family and everybody in Johnny and Susie's neighborhood. $7 million for trauma-informed services. Now, I'm not really sure what the definition for that is, but you might maybe could speak to that. $68 million to expand mental health in full-service community schools. So that hub that Anita Hogue has been telling us about since the early 90s, where your school becomes the mini mall for all the community mental health services and other medical services and the food stamps and all the other social services. That's going to be propped up to $68 million. $5 million for Project Prevent through the U.S. Department of Education that will not only impact your community, but your school districts. It will also encourage governors. Now we have to really put this into midterm elections. Encourages our governors, ladies, to exploit Medicaid even further for behavioral health interventions, multi-tier support programs, and all the other things that are woven into the intervention part of social and emotional learning. But it gets better.
Say one thing about Medicaid, and I don't think a lot of people know this. The majority of Medicaid is funded by the federal government, which means your tax dollars.
Right, it absolutely is. But we also know that through the Every Student Succeeds Act, Medicaid was reformulated.
Yes.
We had one of the representatives here in North Carolina was put in charge of that Title I funding
Hmm.
recalculation that shifted from per pupil to whole school, which
Yep.
ushered in this SEL for all ages being
Yep.
paid for. So your schools get to double dip. All
Yep.
right. $40 million to support certified community behavior clinics, which, because of the Every Student Succeeds Act and the shift in Title I funding, your schools became recognized as federally certified quasi hospitals to allow diagnosis and treatment. $80 million for early childhood education, mental health. So we're not content with going after them in third to fourth grade. No, we got to go back down to preschool and get them there. $50 million to expand mental health access outside of your schools, because after all, everybody in the community needs to sing Kumbaya. And this is all part of the unity agenda that was trotted out in March of this year, that was 4 parts. Mental health was number one, cancer number two, our veterans number three, and then number four, the fight on opioids and drugs.
Well, we all know how that last one has always turned out. The war on drugs. My goodness, let's not get started on that. But let me just say one thing about that. That is something the CIA is bringing it in, so they're the culprit of it. So it's not ever going to stop. It's just a control method.
It
So
is. It is.
yeah,
So,
everybody needs to understand it is a control method.
yeah. So, Jennifer, the reason why I wanted to run down that list for you was in case you had not heard of it. I know a lot of parents have not heard about this new effort that the Department of Education is just so gleeful about. And I'm sure with your presentations, this is going to play really big time into a lot of what we're getting ready to see.
Sure. So, yeah, I had read through it.
Okay.
It's a lot. I need to read it a few more times, right? They
Oh
have
yeah.
it's a lot. It's a lot to take in. Um,
If you don't go
so
cross-eyed at first.
I know. Oh. And and I just, in the very beginning of that document that they put out in
Yes.
like the first
Yes.
paragraph, it states in there, it has some kind of, I think it was 40% of, because they have to justify all this. So
Hmm.
Oh
they say
yeah. Mhm.
40% of, I think, students, something like, I'm not exact, but they don't feel like they belong, something like that. And so I just wanted to say, we were just talking about data. Where do you think they're getting that number? They're getting it from these
Data.
SEL, yes, these
Mm-hmm.
SEL surveys. They're giving children that they are interpreting through the equity lens and getting the data that they, or the results that they
Yep.
want.
Let me ask
Uh,
you a question real quick. While
mhm,
you're talking about the surveys, is that not just a word play for another type of assessment?
mhm.
Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Okay.
surveys, questionnaires.
Okay.
There's other ways that they are data mining children, through the apps the schools use and things like that. But specifically, as far as what can one parent do right now,
Yes.
I always say to go, we have to go after the bloodline, get your kids out of the data, get
Yeah.
them out of the data. It isn't helping the school because it's driving all of this insanity. They use it as their excuse, and then it's being attached to your child, and to think that our government is attaching a score, which will be like a social credit score, to your child is terrifying.
Yeah.
Yep.
So, but I wanted to you so it says for trauma informed
Yes. What is
platform.
that?
Yes.
Yes.
Sure. So I don't know, Suzanne, since you're medical, you may be able to answer it a little
Sure.
better than I can, and then I can add to it, because I know what they have done when they brought in SEL. I didn't know if you wanted to address that. The trauma
Well,
informed. I mean, it's just, yeah.
well, so that's going on when they put in the school nurses. Remember when the school nurse program came in?
Hmm.
School nurse saw everything. They
Hmm.
even were able to bill for health checks
Hmm.
through Medicaid. They became Medicaid providers. So that was a good start to get the medical into the school.
Hmm.
And so anytime a child experiences any kind of trauma, well, who do they call? School nurse. I had to go plenty of
Yeah.
times. And when I was, and I didn't do that very long because it just, yeah, you just don't want to be in that system doing that. But when they will call you if you're going to trauma. Now, here's the thing. you have to inform the parent. You have to call the parent. But if it's really serious, you got to get them to the hospital, and somebody's got to go with them. That's where loco parentis came into play with that, and that is not something you really want anybody doing for you. But yeah,
Sure.
but the trauma informed you. It's almost self-explanatory, but
Hmm.
trauma is not just physical. See, that's where they
That's the
it's
okay.
not just physical. So you have to look at it that way too. You're
Yeah.
looking at mental trauma, physical trauma, spiritual trauma, and emotional trauma.
Now,
Yes.
wouldn't that
Yes.
also include your school counselors now too?
Yes,
Yeah.
Yeah.
yes, it would.
Yeah. So
Yeah,
yeah, and so within there's of course trauma informed care that is important
yep,
for, I mean, that is something that is important in situations and with certain professionals, right, that understand how to
yes,
handle those things. But schools always had a system. We always had a counselor, we had a nurse, right, at the schools to handle situations of trauma. And specifically, it would be situations like ongoing developmental trauma. Maybe a child is experiencing sexual abuse. Our schools had systems that, if that came up, they had counselors, they had ways to
Mm.
help and
hmm,
report and all of the things they're supposed to do. But when they brought in SEL, they expanded the trauma that our schools treated. So when they
Hmm.
brought in social emotional learning, they then included that they needed to include historical trauma, meaning, and it's in their paperwork, trauma of slavery, colonization.
Right.
And so when they did that, when they included historical trauma that goes back generations, they believe, they then, through social emotional learning, could place every single child in school. Every child that is in a social emotional learning school was placed into tier one intervention of the multi-tiered system of supports, the
Right.
MTSS. So every single child was put into tier one.
Yep.
That then required the school psychologists, who are also now radicalized and weaponized, to then be responsible to service every child in some way. Now, that doesn't mean individual one-on-one, but when they placed every child in the school under, because social emotional learning is a trauma-informed care, it is a trauma-informed practice.
Okay.
And so it placed every child into tier one. Now they are responsible for servicing every child as if they have been traumatized or they're at risk for trauma.
Yep.
Yeah.
yeah.
And so they,
I got a little problem with
I do too.
historical
I do too.
trauma here. I
Yes,
mean,
you're traumatized and you didn't even know it. I mean, my
right.
goodness.
I mean,
That's what
I
they
was
tell
not
you.
around. I was not around
Was
when
it on
we
my
were
watch?
colonized. Wasn't on my watch. I didn't even know about it until I got old enough to study about it in school, and it
Oh
was
my
very simple. And you're like,
goodness.
yeah, okay, it was
It's
just a
this
Well,
happy thing to
it's
be.
this
It's like I
umbrella
didn't
that
know we were
allowed
supposed to
them.
be traumatized.
yep.
Yeah,
I didn't
yeah,
know that
no.
we were supposed to
Well,
be
the
traumatized.
children don't either, but that's why they're teaching them with
Yeah,
culturally responsive teaching. That's
that's
why they're telling them you have been traumatized. So
But isn't
then,
that but by bringing this in, you're not creating healthy children. You're creating traumatized kids.
no,
you're
you're
creating
creating
victims.
Exactly.
victims, but here you're also creating someone who is going to be very dependent on the system.
Yep, that's
And
another
that's the
thing.
point, because
That's right.
tied in through this would be those adverse childhood experiences
Mhm.
that we know that Kaiser Permanente and Rockefeller got in bed with
Yep.
and then trotted it over to the CDC. And now they're going, oh, we have all these resilient cities. And so, for everyone who thinks this is just reserved for public education,
It's not.
go look up the resilient cities that the Rockefeller Foundation started. There are over 100 throughout the entire world. San Francisco is the model.
Oh.
Uh-huh.
Mm.
Because the sooner we can wipe out all negativity from a child's life, the more productive they will be, the more healthy they will be, so that not only do we get rid of the school to prison pipeline, but we also have very well functioning people who can contribute to their communities in every possible way. What could go wrong with that? Go to
Oh,
Seattle,
oh
where
my
one of them
goodness.
is. They only prop up the numbers that support this false narrative. They don't
Yep.
show you the number of people who are in deep stuff
Hmm.
Yeah.
because they somehow fell through the cracks of this supposed resilient movement.
And with all that, we shoveled the educratic BS so others don't have to. But I'm telling you, at this point, you want to put your waders on and you want to get them big old rubber boots. I'm I'm telling you, it is it's that bad, and I don't think anybody realizes how bad this really is, and what this is doing to our kids. And think about it: you're creating generation after generation after generation of victims. It's
Mhm.
But it's,
generational
yeah,
victims.
but it also goes back and it would look at each one of us and go, well, here's why you do A, B, C, and D, because didn't you know that back in your childhood you had blah, 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 blah. Whether you did or not doesn't matter
Well,
because they're trying to
I
put
wouldn't
you,
listen to them
they're
anyway because
trying
I
to,
think they're
but
all cracks.
I understand,
Yeah.
but they're trying to put you in a data point
Mhm.
because the more data points they can put people in, the more
Yeah,
funding
they
that
get.
they get, the
Yeah,
more control they get. It's always about the data tying to the money for the control, which is part of what these education savings accounts are doing.
that's true.
And the social emotional garbage goes in with those as well.
Mhm.
Well, it's just all garbage. I I look at it that way because I don't think of psychiatry or psychology as real science. I think they're all quacks. Yeah, don't tell my brother-in-law I said that. But I think they're all quacks. I or whoever created this is all quacks.
Mhm.
I mean, Freud really had some issues here. If you, he was obsessed with certain things that not everybody has those issues, but
Well, I don't know. Jennifer, did you have any thoughts that you wanted to share on some of that last bit about the resilience and the ACEs and that sort of thing?
So I just want, as far as it's ridiculous, absolutely ridiculous, this historical trauma that they now are including, which then allows them to include everyone. But they're also use that idea
Mhm.
to children to separate children from parents, right? Because now
Right.
they're
yes,
planting in children that your parents don't know any better, right? Your parents don't know any better. They don't know. They have traditional, old, out of fashion, old fashioned, thinking and values, right? And then at the same time, they're planting ideas into children that, well, my parents are racist, right? My parents are oppressive. This is how everything was. And it's our
Mhm.
job to change things. And it's part of separating the children from the
Mhm.
parents. Um,
it's also
and
a way of
yeah.
tearing down uh, religious belief systems as
Oh,
well.
yeah. hmm Yeah.
Absolutely, it does. Absolutely. Okay, so we're coming up near the end. So, Jennifer, this is the part of the show where we like to tell folks, here's what you can do. So, we
Yes.
want you to start with what can the audience do to make a difference in this war that is going on in our nation.
hmm I would right now. I've been on a opt your kids out of data campaign because school's about to start. So I would say definitely get them out of the data. I would say also just as a big idea, don't give labels power
Yeah.
because they
Hmm.
shut people down that are speaking up for their children. And they silence people, they bully people, they make people afraid, good people afraid to speak
Yes.
out.
Mhm.
And so I just don't, we cannot give labels power anymore
Right.
because if you're willing to do it, your children are not going to stand a chance against this.
Yeah. Absolutely. Good point.
Absolutely.
And
Yeah.
I have always had a problem with labels
Me
because
too.
they don't truly define who you are.
No.
They
No.
fit someone else's narrative of what they're perceiving you to be, whether it's true or not. So,
hmm
Suzanne, what
That's
do
right.
you have?
Oh, well, one thing I always have, I always go back to the law, Constitution, the state Constitution, Bill of Rights, all of those. Take a look at those parental rights amendments. Stand against them. Now, I know I received a lot of flack when I did the one on Florida because I'm for child grooming now. time for child grooming because I stood against this because they were taking away parents' rights.
Right.
And that's what they're trying to do with all of these. Don't give those credence. Stand on what we have, and that is God gave you rights. God told you as parents and commanded you to educate your children. And when you're educating your children, then you have the control. You have all the rights that you need. They come from God. Government has no place in education. It's unconstitutional.
Right.
They're usurping it. Always drive that home. Always. Because they're operating outside of the law. Don't support any parental rights amendments. If you can, homeschool your kids. But remember, when you do that, you're still going to be exposed to a lot of this through some of this because it's going across the board. School choice, don't buy into that booger either because of the fact that it's not going to matter because every curriculum, doesn't matter where you're at, they're going to have the Common Core. They're going to have the social emotional learning, everything Jennifer just talked about. It's a ruse to get your vote. So be mindful of all of this.
Very good. Jennifer, if someone wants to get in touch with you, say, you were talking that you had been recently before a group in Florida. Say if someone wants to get in touch with you to have you come and give a presentation, how would they do that?
Yeah, thank you. JenniferMcWilliamsConsulting.com. And I have a lot of information on there, and you can email me on there. I'm also on Twitter at Jen, JENN_MCW.
Okay, very good. Well, thank you
Yes.
so much. Hopefully, we could schedule another conversation because I think you brought a lot to the table that our audience did not really know. And so, thank you so much for spending some time with us this evening.
It's
Yes,
my
it
honor,
was
ladies.
wonderful.
Thank you.
It was very wonderful. I didn't. So much is hidden in the classroom that you don't get to see when they're bringing that assignment home. And I don't think parents realize that. And I think that's something they really need to hear so they can be mindful of that. When the convids scamdemic, plandemic came out and children were at home sitting in front of the computer, that was the perfect opportunity for parents to see exactly what was going on in the classroom. So my thing is, okay, they're wanting to get in your home. Well, we need to see what's going on in that classroom. Where's some cameras in there that we could take a look at, hear what that teacher's saying and telling our kids.
That's right. Okay. Well, that about wraps up our show for this evening. If you are interested in having Suzanne and I do a presentation for you, be it in person or online, you can always send us an email at thelibertybells2021@gmail.com. If you wish to financially thank any of the work that we do as we bring you this Saturday night special or our weekly broadcast, if you go to my blog, commoncorediva.com, and use our PayPal option, just put in the line that it is for the Liberty Bells. And we thank you so much. Now, coming up on our Monday show, that will be 6:30. We are going to be talking about the new leader of the Homeschool Legal Defense Association. Is he truly a friend of homeschooling or not? So that will be Monday's episode. Until then, we thank you so much for tuning in. Have a great rest of your evening and take care.
Yeah, and Jennifer, if you'll hang on, we'll say goodbye to you when we close out. So have a good one, everyone.